has been recommissioned, renamed the Zoom room for the next 5 weeks or so. Chad, I think you're on mute. I can see your lips moving, but no sound. Okay, I think we're ready to go. I see the message, Sam.
Yep.
So I'd like to call the meeting of the Historic and Architectural Preservation Commission to order for Wednesday, October 14th, 2020. We can do a quick roll call. I've got myself here. I see Edna.
Here.
Chad. Yep. I see Chad. Houston. Yep.
Here.
Okay. Corey.
Here.
Dana.
Here.
Sean.
Here.
Here. And Sam, you're here. Great. Okay. So do we have an approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting? Could I have a motion on that, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So, Sam, do we have anyone who wishes to make a public comment?
No, sir. There is no one in the virtual audience wishing to make a public comment.
Okay, very good. Moving on, included in the packet was the minutes from the September 9th, 2020 meeting. Do we have any corrections that are needed? Let me first, has everyone had an opportunity to review them, and are there any corrections needed?
I'll make a motion to approve if there's no additions, changes, or corrections.
Okay. Corey made a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Son. Okay, the minutes will then be adopted. Very good. Moving on to the new business. It's the HAPC 2020-12-101 West Church. Demolition and construction of a 4-story structure in the Uptown district. Norm Butt, the architectural group, is the applicant agent. This was originally, tabled in from August, and we had information presented to us at the last meeting, and then we agreed to take 30 days and review the various amount of information and continue our discussion and perhaps come to a decision this evening. So I understand, Norm, you have provided additional information. If you please, could you just take a few minutes and kind of update us on the additional information you forwarded to us via Sam? Norm, I think you're on mute. Sam, are you getting anything?
There you go. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Sorry for getting on a little bit late. I was having trouble getting audio all together on that.
Understood.
Sam, is it possible for you to show my screen? If you would, please.
Yeah. I thought you had that right. So.
Are we good there?
Okay. Give it a try.
I have the screen up, my screen up. If Sam's able to transfer the visuals to my screen.
So I changed the settings so all panelists can share their screen. So you should be able to do it directly.
Okay, so let me see if I can share screen. There you go. Sorry about that. How's that?
Okay.
Is that helpful? Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for coming together again to review this information. We very much appreciate it. And over the past month, one of the things we've done is going back to look over some of the information that we had sent. First of all, I'm not sure if all of you have had the opportunity, but we did drop off to the office there samples of all of the materials that are visible in this rendering, and we've matched the color of this rendering to that. The rendering that we had previously, and some of those, and if I go to the next, this is somewhat where we were heading, and what we hadn't really decided on, other than some of the elevations, was the color and and some other things about that. So one of the things we did is we updated it to the exact colors of where we think the direction should go with this, and then we submitted those materials directly to Sam. One of the things that was a comment of less under consideration before is kind of the scale of all this, and then the roof lines and a number of other things. And I do want to show you this because one of the things that we wanted to do was lower these roof lines down. And you can see with the two major gables, if you can see my cursor, the ends of those gables and the rooftop are going over the top of the corner section and some of the other areas. And so what we've done is we've lowered these gables down to kind of reduce a little bit of the scale of that, which I think is very important to this overall. The other thing that we did too is, and this, we have these these areas projecting out a little further than I thought that they really needed to be. So we took a look at those to see how that would affect the elevations and maybe reduce some of the scale, the visual scale of this by reducing that back and pushing those in a little bit and still having the detail that gives the articulation. And per the design guidelines, it talks about developing facades vertically into sections of 2 or 3 areas, and this kind of helps do that, but without projecting it so far out. I think that's really beneficial. I believe all of you did get this elevation, but there is one thing that I want to point out, which is I think is very instrumental to the discussion here, especially of the massing, is that in this elevation, in this rendering, one of the things we showed, and this is shown in the stake, is we've shown that this cornice line that comes across here is actually present in these 2 recesses. And that's really not the case. In translating this from the non-colored to the colored and working this over a little bit more and doing more detailing, that in our 3D rendering didn't get pulled back as it actually is. And if you can see in the rendering that we had before, that actually is a void right there and does not have the cornice coming across. And actually you can see the side of this portion of this building, and you can see how the gables on this are actually flowing down and actually not continuing, but there are recesses there. And that's really important to the overall component. The reason I circled that is because of that, because it shows that we actually do have recesses set into the building at the entry location, and under the design guidelines and the guidelines, that separation of where the residential or the upper levels are entering needs the discrimination. And so that really helps do that with these, and there's a design factor now. The other thing that starts to show is, and you can see on this elevation, this area at the entryway area, and I'll scroll on down to, and you can see in what, I'm bringing them together a lot of items that you have seen over the 3 to 4 months that we've been talking about this. And this is the area that I was telling you about, that these gables are actually brought down, and they do not, this area does not project up above these other adjacent areas. So that's really helpful in terms of the massing component of this. But in terms of addressing the massing, one of the things that I think was very helpful, and I hope all of you had a chance to look at, is what Sam sent about the areas of the buildings in the Uptown area. And I think that's very important because each one of the buildings in the Uptown area and around this area has a certain square footage to it, but it's how it's also grouped up with other buildings to actually take on a mass larger than the individual building itself. Some time back, one of the things I was kind of alluding to, but not so successfully, was, some of these buildings, yes, there are some that are large and have a long facade, but really Uptown Oxford area is, yes, a sequence of different buildings, but it's buildings that then collectively from above really fill up the entire block. So it's almost a different kind of design approach that we're working on here, in that this component of building, which could be a retail store, and this component of building, which could be a restaurant, and this component of building could be a professional office building or something like that. Those readily could have been built in different segments of time, and in essence fill up the whole block, like in essence the Uptown Business District, the Uptown Business Area has done over the years. So the sequence of development in Oxford is that, from the back alleyways to the front streets, and from street to alleyways and the corners, et cetera. It is developed in the Uptown area as a larger area. And as an example of that, if you go even across the street, you take the building on the corner where Kusenia's is, and if you go from that elevation on Beach Street, you go all the way to the west park of Uptown. That's a full development all the way from from High Street, also back to that alley by the bike shop. So the language of Uptown is kind of following an urban guideline of a figure ground, and urban guidelines use figure grounds where the solids of spaces are either black or white, and then the voids are either white or some other color, a contrasting color. So you get an idea of density of a particular area, you get an idea of open spaces for transportation, you get a number of things. But anyway, in terms of the massing of this is very similar to what's occurred at Uptown. But I think this building has much greater articulation than anything that exists in Oxford right now, in terms of not only dividing it with these recesses that you see here into these components of building, the building also starts to have a more residential character, because other than in the west area of Oxford, in the west part of Oxford, where there are some offices, there really aren't a lot of offices, a lot of retail, a lot of restaurants, as we know. So this, toward the residential area, starts to develop, a lot of that characteristics of buildings with different focuses, but all individually, with this being an element, this being an element, this being an element. The other thing we did in this rendering that is suggested here is we really wanted to bring in the buildings that are next door. And you can see the development of the side of where the theater is. And as you know, that from its alleyway all the way around the corner and all the way to the alley beside the other City of Oxford building, I mean, that's pretty much a full building square development area. The other thing I wanted to do is go back and look at zoning. And as an Uptown business district, which is what this is, this building, the historic buildings across the street here and the building here, are also Uptown business district buildings. And then the building across the street here is in an RO district. This is almost a mirror image of what's happening over Walnut Street and Beach Street. If you were to take this and flip this north-south axis, this in essence is the same zoning, where you have Uptown district on the corner with the buildings around it as Uptown district, but then the buildings across from it with historical characters is an RO district. So, but one of the things that this does is it's from what your question is it pulls this facade back, it lowers the roof down. With this as a mistake, which shouldn't be there, it does show some recesses, and the recess in here now, as it's shown on the plan, and then go to a quick plan, this area right here already shows how we're recessing that back at those entryways to divide up those sections of the buildings. So we think successfully that this, with much more greater articulation than the Uptown, it still has the same kind of language as that, but it really has this mediating, I think, commentary to the residential district. So that's been the main change, or the changes that were developed from the last discussion, and it builds upon all of the design guidelines we followed and criteria we looked at that we submitted, I think, either last time or the time before. I hope that's somewhat helpful for that. I can go into a lot more detail, but I think I want everybody to have as much time that they need to ask questions, or hopefully everybody's had a chance to review all of our responses to the design guidelines, as well as to the criteria that we had individually spoken to.
Well, let me then open the meeting up for discussion from other members. What comments regarding what the information that's just been presented?
This is Dana. So if I understand correctly, Norm, the roof line has been lowered?
The roof line for the main corner structure and the side structures have remained the same. But these gable parts that had previously projected out to Beach Street and to Church Street, those roof lines have been lowered down so that the peaks are all the same throughout the building.
Okay.
Yes, so those have been, I thought those were a little heavy on those corners, and I thought it would be good to bring those down. So those have been lowered.
Okay, and then nothing on the other ends though with the dormers. Those-
Correct. Those are the same, and the peaks remain the same, and these are the same peak condition and roof line condition as the adjacent buildings. Correct.
I did go and look at the materials you put placed in the city building, so thank you for doing
Yeah.
that. I just had a question. What led your decision on particularly the color of the hardy board or the cement board?
One of the things that the Uptown district has, other than just using brick or painted brick or different brick colors itself, I think the variety that comes involved, being involved with that is unique to Uptown district. I think that uniqueness needed to come here when we first started developing the elevations here. We were primarily using the same blend of colors. We did note that we wanted the palette to be a warm palette, which follows with the design guidelines, that the roofs, you don't want black on the roofs and more of the grays or the browns. And so I started thinking a little bit more about how this color differential, which is still a historical color line, and that's one of the things I wanted to make sure that we were still following a historical color line, and what really the limitations of color historically to what the current conditions are. And I just thought this might have a tendency to say, yes, this is a little more residential. It starts to feel a little bit more comfortable with the adjacent space. I think the starkness of going to anything lighter would have been problematic, and I think going darker or beige or anything like that would just not be aesthetically pleasing. So I just personally thought this was, and we tried a number of different colors. The other thing we also did is we looked at these two end buildings as actually having a different brick color. And we found that really segmented it too inappropriately, because all the on the buildings Uptown Oxford, there's a lot of masonry differentiation, because the masonry color is the main thing that's differentiating one building to the next. There's very little articulation in the buildings, but there's masonry that does this. This building is different because it talks to a more pedestrian character at a residential location. It is also viewed from more locations as a corner building than if you're walking up High Street and you're just seeing buildings pretty much laterally beside you or across the street. This has a lot of perspective. So we've, in going back, I think by changing the brick color on these two ends, I think it segmented it too much, and it didn't look like a real urban development kind of planning that has come about as one development instead of a sequence of developments. So that's just, I think, a personal preference to stay with the historic color, but with the siding to really break away from the beige of a masonry look and feel more residential, historical look.
I think the changes and make it of a less imposing structure. It's an improvement.
Yeah, I thought so too. I think it lightened the upper level of it.
Chris, this is Corey. I had three comments. Excuse me. I do appreciate the gables being lowered. It was funny at first, it looked like the mansard-esque part was raised, but then when you toggled between the two, I saw the gables were lowered. I appreciate that. I think it flows better with the design. So I just wanted to compliment you on that. A couple, just for perspective, Norm, you had talked about from the bike shop over to Chase, that block.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. I think of when I go to Chicago or New York, the Empire State Building and Sears Tower, the footprint takes up an entire city block. But if you go 3 blocks over, the city block may be occupied, but it's 20 different buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as far as coverage is definitely an issue, but what is covering it, I think, is important. So, having the footprint of Yager Stadium be a park is different than a football stadium. So I appreciate that, but I think it's really important from the historic aesthetic that, it's not just a coverage. And also, we've discussed this before. with you had referred down to Walnut and Beach. The height, I think you're dead on. There's a lot of height comparison with the Princess Theater, the what I affectionately call the Elms Annex, because there's been put in the auto shop. But the a lot of the references I did notice not only in the packet with the comparable square footage and then some of the facade structures that you shared, those are primarily, now I know Will's Pizza and some of the smaller ones are on Church Street, but the vast majority of the references have been to parcels and properties that are on High Street. And even though they're zoned similarly, I do think, as we were talking, kind of the impact, we've tended in these conversations to talk about the Princess Theater next door, but we're not talking about Bolin and Troy, a law firm that is an old mansion-esque across the street, or the houses. So my concern really is more as we head away from High Street, because it's the flow into the neighborhood. And just for comparison's sake, the proposed building at 101 West Church is 19,895. Just for my counterparts, that is a larger footprint, if my math is correct, than Harrison Hall on Miami's campus, and it would be twice the square footage footprint of Rowan Hall, which is the giant gymnasium, the old Navy ROTC gymnasium attached to, well, it's the front building of Armstrong Student Center. So as we're trying to conceptualize this building, I think it's fair to picture two Rowan Halls or Harrison Hall on campus sitting right there, just for comparison. So those are my comments at this point.
Okay.
If I might, can I say something at this point?
Sure.
Just to respond to Corey. I appreciate what you're saying, Corey. One of the things that I did mention is I really wanted to see what this building was doing adjacent to such a historical structure as the private building that's right here. And you can see we were really concerned about the alignment, the porches coming across, how we thought that might align, how this level starts to come across that too, and that we're not really building a fourth story up here that would be so incongruent with what the roof lines are here. So these kind of gables start to flow with that. So there is some attention that we've tried to do to that. And yes, the scale of this is large, but what we've done with the articulation in these areas to break the building facade up, I think is helpful to them. I appreciate your comments.
I would like to ask you about the adding to the comments that have already been made. Have you looked and how does this compare to what's across the street? And also, my second concern is how much green space there is, and this seems to be have much less green space than the other other buildings across the street.
That is correct, Ed. It does have the setbacks. Excuse me, I shouldn't have broken in. If you want to go ahead and finish.
I was speaking, wasn't I?
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It seems to have many fewer trees and much less green space. And I think comparing that to the buildings across the street is something that I would like to see addressed. And I wondered what you have considered about those questions, and if you consider them.
Yes, thank you, Edna. I appreciate that. One of the things that you can hardly see here is on this rendering elevation, you see the gray structure, which is right here. And it's really a component of introducing new trees to the site. Currently, there are, I think, one tree on this side of the building and one tree on this side of the building. And we're introducing the trees that are on this side of the building. Now, the footprint by the building code for the city of Oxford, the building could have a built structure of almost 22,000 square feet on the first floor. It reduces its capability by taking it down to 19,000 square feet because of the 16-foot setback, which is occurring on the two sides. So what we are doing is we're actually taking advantage of, this is the location of the existing sidewalk, but one of the things that we did was we thought it would be appropriate to actually bring, and this is with talking with the city engineers, and possibly developing where we can extend this out further to actually get more green space in front here, other than having the same condition here on this street here. So you're limiting parking and creating it in a certain zone so you can create more green space at the front of here. And then to soften the building structure, because there is an elevation change here, that behind these trees, so you're walking down the sidewalk here with trees to the driving, to the roadway, and then soften trees to the other side, which kind of start to give a little more edge instead of just looking at bare fencing there. So it's a sequence that is not really directly comparable with the amount of green space to a residential area, because the zoning code now incorporates that 16.5-foot setback to that. So that's kind of what we, what it's doing.
Is there any possibility of saving those mature trees?
We can't, they're in a placement that the one tree here probably could be saved. The one tree over here probably could be saved too if this development component doesn't go through. This building actually sits back further than the existing building that's there now. I mean, sits back off of the sidewalk further than the building that's there now, because the building that's there now actually sits out even further than what the setback is for the adjacent building.
But this building is quite massive and gives the visual impression of being massive, and would be softened considerably perceptually if there were more green and if there were more trees. And I was wondering whether that is even possible and whether you would consider doing that.
Oh, I think more trees can come along both of the street edges. Yes, and these right now, by bringing some more vertical elements of landscaping at the corner and at where the pilasters are, which would accentuate more of the verticality of this, which is one of the design criteria that follows historic to pilasters on buildings. Now, the other thing I mentioned last time is if you go on Beach Street, just down from Church, up from Church to the north, on the left-hand side, there's a 3-story brick building, which in essence with a hip roof. So in essence, that elevation has brick on all 3 facades, and then it has a roof structure that's going back. So we have taken a look up to the north to see where there is an existing building that has 3 masonry floors followed by a sloped roof on top of it. So we did look to the residential further up to the north a little bit. And then, of course, as I said, we look to how it compares to some of the adjacent structures.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Edna.
Chad, Sean, do you have any comments?
Yeah, just a quick question, Norm.
Sure.
And hopefully I'm using the proper terminology here. On the first floor for the storefronts, on the cornices, I'm just noticing that they're more arched.
Yes.
And just when I'm looking at some of the comparables that were used, it's generally pretty flat. So I'm just curious on kind of the decision to do that.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to do is to kind of vary the visual. You can see this is fairly straight across here, and that could be straight across here. But one of the things I think this does is this talks about the difference. Maybe the arches could be on this elevation and straight on this elevation, saying that this is more representative of retail and restaurant space or things like that are up in the Uptown district, and then this softening with these arches is a little more reflective of a residential look, or a little softening of that. But I thought it was necessary, instead of duplicating that, that it would change as you move around the building, so you have a little different perception as you move around the building, and it starts to differentiate a little bit between, okay, this is a building, this portion of the building with this separation actually maybe has a different use. And that's why I think maybe this could be, professional office buildings down here. And this, as I said, could be more of a retail. And the design guidelines really call out a number of things that we've tried to do here. The guidelines say that you really need to develop it into a base, a middle, and a top. And that there's the windows and the glazing that's on the first floor, shouldn't try to be historical in character to mimic that. there's a number of those guidelines. So, as I said, these could be on either location, but it was primarily to try to give some interest as you moved around this building and see it from various perspectives.
Okay.
I hope that's helpful.
Houston, I apologize. I did not want to forget you in that group when I called out Sean and Chad. So Houston, Chad, whoever wants to go next, if you have any comments. Hearing nothing.
Yeah, I guess I don't have any comments at this point in time. Yeah, yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Chad, anything? Okay.
Chris, this is Corey. I have one question to follow up on what Edna and Norm were talking about, and I just might be seeing this. Edna wanted more trees, and we were talking about the easement between the street and the sidewalk. I'm seeing trees that would be in, I guess, at the corner. If you look at the triangulation right there, we couldn't put a tree there because that's a setback obstruction. Am I correct?
You're correct. We would develop whatever trees needs to occur the most we can with the development. Sorry about that. That is correct. That should not be there.
That's fine. It just caught my attention, and I just wanted to make sure if you and Edna were talking about, I mean, there's only so much green space that we're on the same page. But again, nothing critical. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah. Norm.
Yes.
I've looked at this, as you know, I've been looking at this for several weeks, and I appreciate your, newest, the rendering that you provided in the packet as well. I think lowering the roof line, I think, significantly impacts the dramatic effect. I think you've heard a couple of references from other members of the commission about the size and the magnitude, and I've been wrestling with this, as you can tell from our various conversations and meetings, and I'm still kind of struggling. Matter of fact, looking at that rendering that you included, that we got hard copies of, in terms of how this building fits in and with the adjacent structures, not so much on High Street, but more on Church Street itself. I think Corey has spoken a little bit to that. And I think Edna was kind of, going in that direction. I'd like to just expand upon that a little bit. In the picture, I noticed as you look to the west, there the line, and maybe it's just the visual from the rendering. It's as if the adjacent buildings, the roof lines are not as tall, and I have some concerns about how it would look in comparison, not to the buildings on High, but more to the buildings on Church on, either side, the most immediate area, and how it impacts, the adjacent, the neighborhood for which this sits. Can you speak to that at all? I mean, I think, has there been any discussion or any ideas about the idea that perhaps not having this be as tall and as size, and even with the modifications you've made to give the appearance of separate buildings, this is still an overall, it very much appears to me an overall very large structure. Could you speak to that at all?
Well, I do agree. I do agree that it is a large structure. And as I said, I think the articulation helps that. I think the separation helps that too. It is a commercial building, and it is in a commercial area, and it is adjacent to a residential area, just as other buildings that are around the perimeter of the Uptown Business District are also across the street from residential areas, which are primarily RO districts. The difference here is that even though it is a large structure, but it's a structure of three components with connections to it, I think its details say more about a residential structure than a commercial structure. So the first floor, yes, on the first floor level, it's a commercial structure. The second floor is kind of a mediation between that, but it starts to look at like a railing that, you know, that kind of continue to that and take that historical to the building that's next door. And then the upper level really, I think, is an homage to the residential district.
And I
That
can
doesn't exist
see
at
that.
all.
I can
Yeah.
see in terms of the roof line, it's not a flat roof, the arched windows and so forth. But, you know, you've tried to bring in more of a residential structure look to this versus a, you know, commercial, you know,
Correct.
4 stories up, big square box.
Yeah, I clearly didn't want to go that route, and that's why we went with a 3-story, bringing it down with just some accents on some gables and that. And the slope of the roof is probably is around a 10-12 pitch. Design guidelines indicate anything over a 6-12 pitch, so we stayed with the same kind of pitches that are with the guidelines too. The other thing, you know, in terms of, if you go through each one of the, I think it's 21, 22 design guidelines we went through, and then the 15 or 16 pages we put together that, I mean, each individual item on this building speaks to those guidelines. Right? You know, the 3 segment structure of the elevation and the pilasters. So I think there's a lot there that is drawn from what the design guidelines say and how it fits.
Norm, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think we've gone through that in previous sessions. And we appreciate the fact that you've gone through the design guidelines and tried to incorporate as much of the design guidelines into what you're proposing this evening. Yeah. What's up for discussion and decision this evening, hopefully. Okay. We get that.
Okay.
So, but again, those are those are the guidelines, but we do appreciate the fact that you did painstakingly go through and try to bring as much of that into this design. So is there any more discussion among the commission members?
This is
I
Sam.
have one more point, and that is the demolishing of the historic building is very sad. And I would like us to consider and ask you to consider some kind of a historic marker or acknowledgement of the building that was there. And I wonder how if you've given us any thought, and if you would consider that.
Well, I think very much so, because I'm on the facilities committee for the Oxford Community Arts Center. I've been a board member there, and as you're aware, Steve was quite forward in terms of working with the facilities committee and working with the OCAC to get the historic marker in front of the OCAC building, a historical reference to that. I mean, I think that's a given that has to occur here. I think it's important to the community that be part of what this building is, and a reference to that. The naming structure that could maybe go onto the building too, and how the building is called out could be important to that too. I think it's a little premature to say what that is, but I think without a doubt, a historical marker on this would be wonderful, and I think it would be readily approvable on the state level to do that. So I do agree. I think the reference in terms of the historical language of this corner, and it's almost too bad that there wasn't one there before to have people recognize what that building was over the years, other than just a funeral home. Yep. So I think in this case, it might be beneficial.
Okay.
Very, very beneficial.
Sam, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
No problem. I'm glad Edna was able to speak there. I just wanted to let the commission know and chair for you know that I do have some slides available if you decide to go through any of the criteria. It's a fairly long list and it was already in your packet, so maybe it's unnecessary, but if it's available if you need it.
Okay. Is there any more discussion on this? Because I know we've been talking about this for, at least 2 meetings now, not including the pre-application meeting. Any further discussion among the commission members? Well, then I think it'd be appropriate that we take a step forward and decide how we want to proceed with this. one of the things that I had asked Sam to prepare for us this evening to help us in this decisioning process was to put together some decision criteria. And I think, Sam, you were going to put that together and put that up, I believe, so that we could use it if necessary as speaking points.
Sure.
And what I'm asking the members, and you may have seen, you know, in the packet, I had included a memo. And in that memo, what I was asking is that as you know, if we proceed now with making a decision, as you cast your vote, if I could use that term, you would also reference where, you know, within the ordinance that you feel this building is in, you know, supporting that decision to proceed, or if there is something in the ordinance to support your decision not to proceed with the proposal. So that's all I ask, is that therefore we have it kind of not only what you're, you know, what you're voting on or what your decision is, but and also providing support as to, you know, why you've made that decision. So that was the purpose of that memo in the packet. So
Point of order, and we kind of touched on this last time. I mean, if folks want to offer their rationale, more power to them, but we have no obligation to explain a yay or nay vote. So I appreciate that, but if, you know, somebody doesn't feel that this is worth it, they don't have to justify their vote.
I respect that. I can understand that, Corey.
Okay.
That's fine.
I just wanted to make sure people didn't feel obligated
Yeah,
to do a preference.
I just request that way, you know, as we go forward, if someone were to later on, like, why did they decide to do this or not decide to do this, that there'd be some type of trail, if possible, if you're willing to, you know, provide that support, by all means, please. And
that's where our comments are reflected in the minutes.
Right.
I will add to that, though, Mr. Watt, that whoever's making the motion will need to make that clear, regardless of who does the voting. The making of the motion will need to be based on a citation of the decision criteria that either supports it or it does not.
I understand that the instruction was to say yay, nay, and why.
I apologize if I misstated that. Thank you, Sam. So having said that all, and thanks for bearing with it all on this, do we have a motion to approve this presentation? I get back to my notes real quick. Approval on HAPC 2020-12, 101 West Church Street. Do I have a motion for approval on that?
So move.
Oh, who made that motion?
Danny.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Houston seconds. Okay. Shall we do a, Sam, you want to go through it? Be the moderator, if you don't mind?
For a roll call,
You're right.
I'd like to propose an amendment.
Okay. Oh, I'm going to mute myself. There's a lot of background noise right now.
A condition to this motion, I would like to offer that whether official through the state or not, historical recognition and designation of the site and the former building are included in the approval process as a condition of approval.
Okay.
So Dana made the motion. Technically, he can accept it.
Okay, Dana, do you accept that modification? I think you were the one that made the motion.
I accept.
Okay. And Houston, as a second, your second remains valid? Okay, Sam.
there was some discussion about trees, and that's not a code requirement. Is it necessary to have trees being placed in either the front yard setback or the tree lawn a condition? I think that if the applicant is in agreement to it, and I think they are, this would help to sort of codify that for the future in case there's any questions.
Sam, from our comment, that would be included, and we would be presenting it as part of the development of the project, which could be reviewed and discussed and expanded as necessary then.
Okay, so maybe not necessary as a condition.
So we're not going to put that in as condition? I think I would move that we would put that in as part of the conditions.
Okay, so Edna, you wish to amend the motion to
Right.
include the trees.
Yes. And
Dana?
as much green as possible.
Dina, do you accept this modification?
Yes, I accept it. I mean, the
Okay.
requirement is trees in the parking strip.
Houston, you're still good with your second. Thank you. Much appreciated. Okay. Sam, do you want to call the roll?
I'm ready to call the roll. Thank you. I will start with Mr. Wagner
Yes.
and to Mr. Smith.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Watt,
No.
Ms. Southard,
Yes, but I remain very concerned about the scale of this. And I don't, that still remains a problem. So but we are now voting to approve or not approve, right?
Correct.
So I think the scale is a problem. You know, and so actually, if I can change my vote, I will have to vote no, because I think that having a building that's 4 times as large as the current building and that much of a scale issue remains a problem, although I would, obviously I think that we cannot demolish the existing building and have nothing there. So this is really a dilemma and a problem.
Okay.
Mr. Kiger,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Skoglund.
I'm going to vote no, and let me explain. As I've gone through this, my rationale for saying no is I still struggle with that section, and particularly in determining the compatibility. And I'll just reference what's in the ordinance, and it says, in determining compatibility, HAPC shall consider the following: the general design character, appropriateness of the property of the proposed alteration or new construction. Then it has part B as the scale of the proposed alteration or new construction in relation to the property itself, surrounding properties in the neighborhood. And that is the reason why I'm saying no to this, basically on the grounds that it is not really congruent with the neighboring structures along Church Street. So my vote is a no.
Okay, so that's a 4-3 approval.
Right. Okay. So it's been approved. Norm, it's been approved as presented with subject to the conditions as stated this evening, including the trees, the historical marker, and other references.
I do want to thank you, all of you, for all of your time. I know this for me as well as you, very strong commitment to the language of the city of Oxford. I think we've tried to do a good job being sensitive to that, and we'll see what happens. But I very much appreciate all your time and efforts over the last couple months and over the years of where this project stands. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Norm.
Thank you.
Okay. Shall we move on to the next item on the agenda?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on, the 36, we're into old business, 36 East High Street, the detail changes and approved COA. This is the Brick Street property. Sam, you want to speak to this a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So the building permit was submitted recently within the past couple weeks, and we noticed some changes on there and asked the design team for additional information. We felt that the changes were a little bit beyond what was anticipated with the previous HAPC approval. This one went to HAPC and Board of Zoning Appeals. went to Board of Zoning Appeals because of the location and proximity to the street for the front yard setback. It's a corner lot. The HAPC approval was granted, but some of the changes that were recent were not within that approval. And in talking with Chair Skoglund, we decided that we should bring it up for the rest of the commission to look at. One of the changes was a bar roof structure has been added to the sky deck, is what the applicant team is titling it. And there's also been a change in the railing material from a sort of a faux wrought iron or wrought iron style, if I'm correct, Mr. Riggs, then it's changed to a glass rail. So those are the two primary changes. And I think that our determination from a zoning standpoint is it is within the scope of the Board of Zoning Appeal, but not necessarily within the scope of the HAPC. So I don't know, Bob, if you have the ability to share your screen or not. I can give you that ability. Or board members,
Sure.
if you have any questions, go ahead and send them my way. And I'll see if I can answer them while Bob is getting his screen ready.
Before
Right.
we get into that, can I just make, maybe I missed something there, Sam?
Yeah.
This was originally proposed and it was approved by HAPC. I think the understanding from my HAPC was the accessibility to this roof deck. And I think that accessibility changed at the BZA meeting. I think when we talked about it initially, I just want all the members of our commission to understand that there's been a change in design, let's call it that, at the request of BZA. And that had to do with access, the second floor access.
Yeah, the condition from the Board of Zoning Appeals was that there not be any access to the inside of the building from the sky deck. They would have to go all the way through the steps down to the ground to get into the building. So I don't know if that's relevant to the HAPC's necessarily their review, but that's correct. It is a change.
Right. I just wanted to bring that out. It's not, access, that's more of an internal thing, building BZA plan. It's not within the HAPC criteria. It's not true external to the building. So, but that was a change. Just want everyone to be aware of that. Okay. So, okay. Shall we talk about this one? Okay. So you want to proceed?
Bob, do you have the ability to share your screen? If not, I can put a slide up there.
Okay. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Everybody hear me all right?
Yes. I think we're good.
Okay. Okay. So I just want to clarify on the egress portion that it was brought up in the BZA that we would not put an egress from the second floor out, and we have not done that as part of this change. The location of the bar on the second floor is only, you can only get to that from the stairs that are going up to the deck. There is no egress to this sky deck from inside the building at all. We've kept the stairs where they were located through HAPC and then through BZA, so that the only egress in and out of the sky deck is up the two stairs that are there. Let me go ahead and share my screen so you can see the drawing. Everybody see that?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay. Okay. So after HAPC, we went to BZA, and the recommendation from BZA was that the railing height to match the height of the columns below the stone caps, which is 4 foot 8 inches tall. The standard railing height at the ground level was 42 inches tall, and that's what standard guardrail height is to meet Ohio code. So the railing at the top, they had a fear that people could toss somebody over top or throw something over if it was only 42 inches tall. So being at 4'8" made it taller to get to the underside of that stone cap. So after that decision was made, we looked at the railing height, and having the picket rail like it's shown on the lower level at 4'8" tall seemed overly heightened and almost jail-like, that you were sitting up inside it. When you're standing there, it was almost up to your shoulders in height. So if you're sitting at a table, it was above your eye level. So we looked at different options and looked at the idea of doing a glass rail system up there. But in doing that, keeping the glass rail itself at the 42-inch high recommendation of the glass manufacturer, railing manufacturer, and also the Code of Ohio, which has railing heights at 42 inches. So to do that, I'll show you this section. What we're looking at doing is at the base, putting two steel tubes at the base, stacked on top of each other to be welded together, and then the glass rail on top of that. So the tubes at the bottom create a kick plate for anybody that's standing up there, so that if they're kicking it with their feet, they're kicking the steel tubes, not the glass rail. So you would have 16 inches plus the 4 inches of the rail system itself. So 20 inches of height below you for somebody to hit before you got to glass. The glass rail itself is a 13/16 inch laminated safety glass. So it's just over 3/4 inch thick. Testing reports for the glass, we've gathered several of them from Florida, from California, which are the two stringent areas. And for the state of Ohio, it's 200 pounds pressure on the rail. And the test from Florida was 365 pounds. And it passed the 365 pound pressure test. So that was the system that we're looking to put up here. It can or cannot have a top rail on it. The rendering here does not show a top rail on it, but a thin top rail could be added to span across as well. So that kind of sets the tone for what the railing change was. To be glass, we looked at changing to glass so that if you're sitting up here, you had a clear view of everything around you, and if you're down low, you had a clear view up into the sky deck. It also then helped with the safety side of it, is that nobody could throw something through the railing down to the lower level, or get something knocked out of somebody's hands and kick down to the lower level. It was a barrier all the way around. So that's how the railing decision was made to go from the pickets to the glass rail. The canopy was added when the decision was made to have a bar on the upper level, so that people were not coming up and down the steps constantly. So that bar is situated here on the upper level, so that as you come up the left stair, you come up on the west side, planned west side of it, and on the right stair, you come up on the planned east side of it. So there's access from both sides to keep people separated, and then to have people be able to be served upstairs and downstairs, keep them separated that way as well. Once the decision was made to have the bar up there, we talked about having a canopy over it to protect the bar from rains, snow, sleet, sun. Obviously, in bad weather, it's not going to be used, but in a sunny day, it protects the person tending bar up there from the sun. And it also protects the equipment up there on it on a rainy day to protect it. So the canopy itself in section looks like this. It's a rod system canopy. So it's supported off the existing wall at the lower level, and then the rod system at the top to cover the bar area itself, but no other portion of the sky deck. So those were the two issues that were brought up from the building department submission, was the canopy over the bar, and then also the railing above changing from pickets to glass. In our minds, because of the height changing to 4'8", wanted to get more clarity from the rail, and also adds more safety from things falling over the rail, which was brought up from the zoning meeting from the fire chief.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Very informative. I'd like to entertain some discussion on this to get some feel from the other members of the commission on their thoughts on this. Since Corey, I'm always, so I'm going to start down the bottom. I seem to always forget Houston. So I thought I would start with Houston tonight. Houston, please. No disrespect intended, but I thought I'd let you start first tonight.
Yeah, I don't see anything here that is concerning design-wise. I'm not sure if there's anything here that, from a historic or architectural standpoint, that jumps out at me. I do wonder about using the different fencing styles on the top railing versus the bottom, but I understand the want for the difference in those. And I do appreciate the taller fence on the upper deck. I know that's not necessarily historic or architectural, but for safety purposes, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Corey, any comments? I'll switch to you.
Yeah, I'm looking back at the July packet, and we had more three-dimensional renderings, which were helpful in, I guess, conceptualizing this. So I do like the concept of the higher railing and the glass for transparency. I do have a concern because with this being historic and architecture, with the building being Art Deco, I'm those steel tubes, for lack of a better description, I'm a little concerned how those would look. And again, we want to make sure it's complementary to the existing building, but also not a distraction or something that's out of place for those looking at the building. And again, back to the 3D rendering, I guess adding, when we were conceptualizing this before, it was really just projecting the existing ground structure up. Now we're going to have something protruding from the building. And again, back to, I'm by no means an architect, but Art Deco had minimalist awnings, and they primarily were over entryways and cloth canopies over front facade windows for decoration. So, not being able to see the canopy off to the side, I think I know which kind you're talking about, but that's a concern I have and a reservation I have at this point. And then the third point I have has nothing to do with the purview of our commission, but I am a little concerned that the only way up or down is stairs. And from an accessibility and a design standpoint, that just as a good citizen of the world and somebody familiar with disability services, that's a concern to me. Again, not under the purview of this commission, but if I was a Brick Street patron in a wheelchair, I'd be really disappointed I never got to go up there.
Understood. Okay. Edna, any comments?
Sorry. Corey has just raised a very interesting point about the accessibility issue, and I would like to hear about an answer for that. So there's no access from the inside of the building to this balcony. Is that correct? And other than that, I have no problem in terms of the design. But the question about the accessibility is one that I'd like to hear considered. So thank you.
Okay.
Yes, it was brought up during the BZA hearing that we were being told that we could not come through the existing building out to this area. That would allow us an area to come out to allow accessibility to the space. But it was brought up as a condition that we would not come out the second floor onto the upper level, but it would only be accessible from the outside. In doing that, I believe their concern was that if you have it part of the second floor, then it's becoming more of the square footage of the building as a whole, and that then raises our occupant level, which we're trying not to exceed the occupant level of the existing building. So that was the reasoning behind it.
Okay.
Can you solve the accessibility issue, or do you not see that as a problem? Or Can you have a little lift or something?
At this point, it's not part of the idea, but it's something that could be looked at down the road as far as a lift on the end that overhangs on probably the west end of it, where a lift could be stationed to get you up to the upper level. Doing a lift on the stairs would impact too much of the occupant load coming up and down the stairs. So I think it's something we could look at down the road. The reason it wasn't part of the original design is that it's not added to the square footage of the occupant load of the building. So it's not an accessible space for the masses. It's just an extra space to spread out the masses. So that was the original intent behind it.
Yeah, if I could chime in, this is Chris. I think the fact that it's really not within the purview. It's a good point. Don't get me wrong. It's just not within the purview of HAPC, and I'm not trying to leverage that as I'm punting on this. But I do have to comment the fact that this went before BZA. I would have thought that if it was the accessibility was such an issue, BZA would have made some type of, condition upon that, requirement that there'd be some type of, from an accessibility standpoint. And I don't mean to kind of volley this back, but Sam, that may be something that we need to, take back and find out what, was that taken into consideration? Not to put the proposal here at risk. It's just, it's a concern I think we all have, but I don't know whether or not it's within the purview of HAPC to render their decision based on accessibility.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't think it's anything that would have been within BZA's purview either, because it wouldn't have been related to the front yard setback. So if this is something that we would require, it would have had to have been a local building code amendment to the state building code, because the state building code, I don't believe, requires access to all parts. However, there is a pending building permit under review. And if that gets flagged by our building official, then that would be a requirement. So the way the building code works is it's not discretionary. It's either required or it's not. So I can report back on that, and you can certainly make the ask. But at this point, I don't think you have the ability to make it any kind of a condition. But it's good that you bring it up to discuss it, because these kinds of discussions help us to think about other city policies and rules, as we are continuing to be a redeveloping and infill development city. So I'm glad that you do bring it up.
Yeah, so Sam, if you could take that back as for the permit process. I think this is all good. I just want to keep things going. Dana, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I just had one question about the anchoring point for that awning. Does that require a pole to go up past the existing roof line? So I don't quite understand how that's going to be attached.
For this point here,
Yeah.
this is at the top of the existing wall height.
Okay. And then the roof line, the rounded roof starts right there.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Chad, anything? Okay.
Microphone working. Okay.
Understood, Chad. Do you have any comments? Thumbs up? Nope. Nope. Okay, Chad's good. Okay. I'm trying to make sure, Sean, I don't think you've had an opportunity. Any comments?
No comments.
Okay. Did I miss anyone? I know we've had a lot back and forth on this. Okay. I thought I would just share a few things. Initially I was kind of concerned about having, from an Art Deco, the design standpoint and so forth, the idea of utilizing the glass. But I think the idea that the separation, it's not like it's almost 5 feet of, 4 feet, whatever, of glass. I think the glass, though, would provide a better option than if they, as was spoken to originally by the applicant, to have had the bars, if they tried to mimic the railing that they have on the first floor, on the second floor to go to that height, I think that would be even, more unattractive to the structure. At least with the glass in place, as I look at this and think about it, it at least still allows you to see the facade of the building as it is today and so forth. And it's not obstructed by the amount of railings that would be up there, and it would be significant in size. So I think this is, a good option of, utilizing the glass. Granted, we don't see a lot of this. This is something, relatively new. If I recall, we are seeing this on the property on the Elms extension. I think they were planning to put glass on the top of that one as well. So it's being used elsewhere. So that's just my thoughts on it. I think it's a good response to what came back from in terms of what BZA had to say. And I just wanted to make sure that we all had an opportunity to review this and comment as needed.
I would assume that for safety reasons, there might be something bright to remind people that they shouldn't bump into that glass. It's I don't know, whatever you probably have already thought about that, about something, a band of bright red or something, I don't know, but it would seem to me
One
that,
thing we've talked about on the inside, as you're standing up there, having the steel actually be painted yellow.
yeah, okay.
So not from the
Yeah.
outside, so you see it from the outside, but on the inside, have it yellow so that it's something you're aware of as you walk up to it.
That's great. Thanks.
Bob, this is Corey. I have a question.
Yes,
On the original proposal, I had voted no, but this is already been approved, so I view this. Chris likes to coach me on this. The main dish has already been served. Now we're just talking about a dessert. Would you be open to and willing, because like I said, without visualizing this or without seeing it, I'm trying to visualize. Would you folks be open to, as much as possible, again, I don't want you to incur a ridiculous cost, but as I look at your July proposal, the facade of Brick Street, so with the old theater marquee and some of the Art Deco, when you have Queen City or whomever is going to do the awning over the bar, could you make every effort to replicate that so that it does, you know what I'm saying is
Right.
I don't want a 1930s building with a 2020 awning on it and a lot of it's the devil's in the details, but it just occurred to me from looking at the design when they were just asking that that would be a good mimic.
Yes, I understand what you're talking about. And yes, Queen City awning would be who we would use to fabricate it. And they have hundreds of different variations of that style of rod hanger system. So we can definitely look at something that matches this style as close as possible.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay. Any,
Bob, if it's okay, Chris, I have a question as well for Bob. I wanted to see, kind of on behalf of the commission, Bob, if you, I don't know how committed you are to the color red on the horizontal banding, but I wonder if you're not, if you'd be willing to let us, pick out the colors administratively, because now that that's higher and you want to make that steel tubing red, those additional 2 layers, I wonder if it's going to be a little bit too much and maybe a more neutral color might be acceptable. And that's something we could work out later.
Yes, and actually on our end, we were only going to keep the what's red now red, and the new tubes would be like a gray or black or some neutral, maybe even white to match the
Okay.
CMU. But we could talk that through you and figure out what you prefer for those other steel bands.
Okay.
But as of now, we were only going to keep the red ones, the main structure.
Okay. The previously approved.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't want a ton of red across there either. Just a nice thin line that mimics what carries on what was going on in the front.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
okay, so I'm not sure, Sam, whether or not we need to do a roll call since this is really more of an amendment. We can just do all in favor.
Can we capture in the vote that my comment about the roof and then Sam about the colors?
Corey, do you want to just kind of make a motion to amend,
I would love to, Chris. I'll make a motion to accept the amendments to this proposal as presented with the additions of administrative approval by the city staff for colors on the facade Sam, what was that? The metal facade?
The steel tube.
Steel tube. Thank you. And then that Bob, with Sam's consultation approval, will work to replicate the awning to be historically complementary.
Okay,
Architecturally complementary. It doesn't have to be historical. Architectural.
we have a second on this.
Seconded.
Thank you, Edna. Okay, should we call a roll or just do we need a roll as necessary, Sam, do you think?
I would just do a voice vote and a thumbs up if anyone's microphones are off. Or
All in favor, please, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We got you, Chad. Okay. Changes as per Corey's motion or approved. We can go from there. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you all very much for the time.
Okay. On, we're getting there, folks. Something that we, two things real quick. One is we received, and Sam can probably speak to this a little bit more. We're getting requests from I believe it was what, AT&T, Sam? Or I think it was AT&T. Has come in, they've submitted a request to basically erect a series of basically poles that they would mount antennas on. And the three locations, Sam, correct, I think they're in the notes, but the three locations basically is adjacent to McDonald's. There's one adjacent to the Stewart Square outside CVS. And I forget where the third one was, Sam. By Kroger there, kind of, if you kind of where I think where the bus stop is, kind of that, where that shelter is.
Yep.
So you want to just quickly speak to this a little, Sam, in terms of.
Sure. Yeah. So in the world of historic preservation, this is called a Section 106 review because that's the federal code that came from the Historic Preservation Act of 1966. So this is only getting noticed to the city of Oxford because we're registered with the State Historic Preservation Office, which is a subsidiary of the federal government historic preservation. So anytime someone wants to do something that has a federal connection or a federal nexus, if you will, with funding, or in this case, radio waves, cellular communication, they have to do what's called a Section 106 review notice to the local historic agency. So even though these are all outside the historic district, they have to check the box that they've notified us. So we're not asking for you to review or approve anything. If you have comments or questions, we can pass them along to the State Historic Preservation Office and let them know our concerns about, if you have concerns about the proliferation of poles in the tree lawn strips around town and how they look, we can pass that along. I don't know if it'll do anything, but we can do that. Or if you want to talk through your city council rep about rules and regulations about these, regardless of what happens at the state or federal level, you can do that too. So that's kind of the history. They're 35-foot poles. Some are wood, some are steel. They have an electric meter and a control box. They're probably just going to look like utility poles, but we could see a lot more of them. So at some point, we may want to have some regulations even outside the historic district. But for right now, we're just starting to see them. And you may be aware of it already.
If I could, Sam and I chatted briefly about this. We think this is basically part of the advent of 5G service and so forth and trying to support all that. So that may be what's bringing some of this about. Since I know, Sam, you and I talked, I've given this a little bit more thought. I still wish they would look to, perhaps mask or hide these better in terms of putting them on a rooftop, particularly the one by CVS. I wish they could work out something where it could be attached to the roof of the building there, the Stewart Square building, versus standing out there as another utility pole. But I also know right now we've got utility poles lining Spring Street there and so forth. And I think it's almost to the point where we don't even see them. That would be my desire would be they would be made part of incorporated into a building, an existing building if there was one nearby, versus just putting up a pole for the sake of oh, it's a lot easier and, putting up a pole, strap a meter on it, and they don't have to deal with any landlord issues and so forth. That would be my desire. And now that may be something you wish to take back to council as a consideration, back to the city council.
I have a question. I know with some utilities that like the new developments, it's all underground. Obviously, this one could probably never be underground. It would make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And what caught my attention in your memo, Sam, was ORC allows municipalities to have design standards that are non-discriminatory. So would this be something that could fall into if city council were to pass an ordinance that says all new construction or repair should go underground where feasible, or to Chris's point, must be concealed from, it could have a benefit because it would also apply to electric poles, coax, things of that nature. Is that correct? Would that be the best way to do it? Because we're not singling them out.
So the ORC just got updated about a year ago because the telecommunication companies lobbied the state legislature.
Imagine that.
Tell cities that they can't prohibit these. So that would basically be against the law to say that you had to put it underground. But you could have rules that said, well, you can't put them any closer than X number of feet. You have to make them wood, or you have to paint them green if they're steel or something like that. But to say that you can't have them, or you have to put them on an adjacent building, probably would get us in trouble pretty quickly with these telecom companies. So
we couldn't tell them they have to put it on a building, but to your point, we could do like a setback of they can't be within X of a roadway, or because I also, as Chris said, there's been such a drive in the last couple decades to, especially residential, to put utilities underground, and part of it's aesthetic, but also part of it's safety. And here we are adding poles within 5 feet of a roadway. So, yeah, definitely. I like my cell phone. I'm not opposed to the poles, but it's not going to really impact the world if it's, on the backside of Stewart Square, So
yeah, what they tell us is that they can move them within like 100 or 200 feet but that's really about all they can do. They've already done like a study to determine where it needs to be. So, and our service department staff really doesn't have any guidelines, so they pretty much have to allow them. So if city council wanted to adopt some guidelines that gave the staff something to lean on, that would probably be helpful, but it is just more to enforce and regulate. I understand that. So it's a balancing of sort of this public utility with safety and aesthetics. So
Sam, could I offer this up as just out to the whole group? Maybe you and I could sit down and just put something together that we can then share out at the next meeting, that Edna could then, carry back, or yourself present to the city council for consideration, whether it's, painting them green, whatever, the setback rule and so forth. Rather than try to debate it tonight, perhaps we, just you and I sit down and maybe draft up something that we can then take back before HAPC for their review, that then with that support, Edna could then take to the city council or yourself, as recommendation from HAPC for city council's consideration.
If HAPC wants to recommend this, that's a very good idea, and come up with a way that if HAPC recommends this to city council, then staff can study it and move forward with legislation that would offer some sort of limitations and some sort of guidelines. I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Well, and one last point, Chris, as you draft this, remember, we've talked about not necessarily expanding the districts, but recognizing maybe areas or parcels or things of that nature. So I do think that, at first glance, some people might scratch their head why HAPC is involved, but we have had discussions of a more holistic look at the city. So I think this is great. If anyone else wants to
join the party, by all means. Corey's sitting there going, yeah, and I'll gladly take it on. I don't imagine there'll be much time, but I don't want anyone to think that it's just me and Sam behind closed doors trying to work this out. I just think from an essence of times, rather than debate it tonight and try to come up with something, let's take it aside and then come back to the group with a recommendation.
All you, buddy.
Okay.
Okay, I have seen such things or pictures of such poles that have been camouflaged in other cities and other countries as well. So this is not a totally new idea to have some ways to make these more attractive.
Okay. We'll go from there. Okay. Can we move on to the next item? You may recall, those of you that were on the HAPC back in January, we had a discussion about, with Mike's term being up and so forth, and he being, term limited out and so forth, the succession in terms of who would be the next chair and so forth. And I appreciate everyone supporting, me be the chair. But one of the things that I thought we had decided on, but in going back through the notes, and I appreciate Lynn going back through the minutes and so forth, is we never finalized who would be, I know we talked about it, the co-chair, the vice chair of HAPC. So right now I'm here as chairman, but if I get hit by a truck or something, not that I'm planning to walk out in front of one, or something else that I could not make the meeting, we currently don't have a vice chair officially named. So I'd like to have just a, quick, or if anyone wants to, step forward and serve as vice chair. I thought for a while we had Corey in that, but I don't know if that got formalized.
I had thought that I had read that Dana was.
It could be Dana or whatever. That's just it. In going back to the notes, we had
I
discussion.
can't remember.
We didn't.
Yeah, I remember having the discussion, but I'm the vice chair of planning, so I was like, maybe I could use the two.
And I understood, Corey, because I remember there being discussion about could you, because you were on
That's
planning,
right,
also
yeah.
serve as vice chair, and it was like, yeah, you could if you wanted, but again, we never decided. So I'd like to see if we can get someone that nominated and appointed as vice chair.
I guess, yeah, so who is eligible out of the group? Yes,
I'd
Corey.
like to make a motion that Dana be the vice chair.
I second that motion.
Okay. Chad sitting there nodding, yeah. Sean smiling. Houston. This could be
Back in the
Dana
notes.
did a nod, but nothing's happening.
this could be one of the quickest items we decide on this evening. So, very good. Dana, would you be interested in serving as co-chair of HAPC?
Sure.
Okay. So, everyone in agreement? Okay. Welcome. Sam, do we need to make some type of motion, or?
I think the motion's already out there.
And seconded, so we take a
Motion
vote.
second.
I think we're good to go then, because yep, I know it was seconded, I think, by Edna. So
Don't we have to vote?
and that's what I'm going to call for next. All in favor of Dana Miller serving as vice chair of the HAPC, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Don't I have to recuse myself?
Got enough votes. It
You're
doesn't
supposed to vote for yourself.
Doesn't matter. Okay.
I had a question, Chris, if I remember. So Mike, you were vice chair for
Right.
a long time. Okay.
And you can, if you want, reach out to me if you want to talk about it and so forth, but
Sure.
it worked out well, I know, with Mike and I, because I was kind of around. So sometimes, for some admin approvals and stuff like that, I was close by, I ran up, but that doesn't mean I'm going to say, Grant, here you go, Dana, all the admin approvals are yours. Not at all.
Okay.
It's just a backup for me. That's the biggest thing.
Okay. We'll
All right.
talk in between the meetings. So.
Yes. So, okay. Last thing I think we have on the, do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
I
Okay,
will second that motion.
second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All opposed? No. One quick comment. I appreciate everyone's help and support as we work through the decision process earlier this evening. Thank you very much for your participation in that. I thought it was a good discussion and a good process we followed. And that was, I thought, most important, that we follow through with our appropriate process in making our decision. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chris, for.
Good night, folks.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night. You can leave, or you can all leave now.